she's a mess head too, just like Jeff. She's mad at me because I fired her and don't let her work for me anymore. She's mad. So they're not going to say anything good about me.
I got nightmares in my head, I fear. Thoughts build up until I can't hear. My mind fills up into a creature.
Hello and welcome to True Crime Rocket Science, the most authentic voice in true crime. Obviously, when you've been traveling across America from crime scene fabrics as distant as Long Island and Gilgo Beach, New York, to Coronado Island in San Diego, to Mesa, Arizona, and Austin, Texas. Well, when you find yourself in a Holiday Inn Express in Broomfield, Colorado, there's a lot swirling in your mind besides the fact that Barry Morphew came here on Mother's Day in 2020. On that day, Barry was here the entire day. He was at the hotel most of the day that his wife was first reported missing. And Suzanne wasn't seen again until someone stumbled across her bones in an empty field about 200 miles south of Broomfield. And that was about 3 years after she disappeared. When you're in Broomfield, as I was, especially having come directly from Moffat, there doesn't seem to be any point in being in Broomfield. Also, the desolate fabric, that empty field, seems a world away from the hustle and bustle of highways and urban furniture north of Denver. Once here in Broomfield, that field outside Moffat feels like a galaxy far, far away. I think it's, for me, one of the biggest insights I got being in the area was the intertextuality. And so besides the 5 insights I'm going to share with you in this analysis, I also want to kind of cocoon all of that within the inside of intertextuality, and let me know whether you think it's appropriate or whether you think it's not, whether perhaps you don't think it's relevant. Because I found it impossible, even though I was inside the fabric of the Morphew Case. One moment I was at Moffat, the next Broomfield. It was very hard not to think of the Chris Watts case. And then the thought occurs to you, was Barry thinking of the Chris Watts case? Now, try to stay with me. The next bit of analysis may feel disorienting. What I'm going to do is play up the significance of the Watts case, join a couple of dots, right, to the Holiday Inn Express, and then see if you follow the possible criminal psychology woven through the fabric here. Before we get to that, if you haven't subscribed to the channel, please do. Bear in mind, I will be doing a follow-up to this based in Poncha Springs, visiting there and the things that we noticed and the conversations we had there. Some quite interesting things came out of that little visit. So if you're interested in that, please subscribe. If you're enjoying this video, please like, share, leave a comment. You can also hit the thanks button, and let's get started. So from Broomfield, it's less than 20 miles, barely a 20-minute drive to Frederick, where the Watts family lived. Westminster, where Watts and Kessinger went to watch a movie, is less than 10 miles away from Broomfield. Kessinger's home in North Glen is closer still, less than 8 miles west of Broomfield.
I know what you're thinking.
Just because I wrote hundreds of blogs and over a dozen books on the Watts case, I'm projecting. It's because of my own bias that I think Barry must have been aware of the Watts case as well. Okay, well, it's a fair point, but try to keep an open mind. I am going somewhere with this, and it may make a lot more sense of the Holiday Inn Express aspect. Maybe it will, maybe it won't. Now, if we ask a general question, are there any signs that Barry Morphew paid attention to true crime? Well, we get an answer through 5 paragraphs on page 29 of the affidavit. And it's from Suzanne's spy pen that Barry was listening to multiple episodes of Forensic Files that included the killings of Mary Lee Wilson, Donna Payant, by Lemuel Smith, the murder of Vicky Lynn Hoskinson, and it goes on and on. Even the case of Walter Scott, many of them missing persons. Now, if Barry listened to multiple episodes of Forensic Files while driving in his truck, and if this was going on around late March 2020, which is really barely a month before the murder, and if Barry often drove long distances for work, meaning if he was listening to this sort of thing while he was driving, and he often drove, then wasn't he often listening to true crime type content? Because the 5-hour session that was recorded in late March when Barry drove to Pueblo, well, then what other cases was he paying attention to? I don't think that's difficult to answer. I think one just needs to look at the timeline, but bear in mind, Pueblo happens to be where Kelsey Bereth worked, which is another famous Colorado murder case that started off as a missing persons case where an intimate partner disappeared and her murderer turned out to be, as I say, her intimate partner, Patrick Frazee. I wrote a book about that case as well. Now, if you want to know where I'm going with this intertextual stuff, stay tuned. Please stay tuned until the end of this analysis. I think it's quite a shocking insight. Anyway, let's start off with me sharing some of my notes based on actually being in Broomfield, staying at the actual hotel that Barry stayed at, moving inside, moving outside the hotel, and also visiting nearby dumpsters, including at the Men's Warehouse. So let's get started with those 5 insights from staying in the Holiday Inn Express. Number 1, go the distance. So it's not just the Holiday Inn Express, it's where is it? Well, I've driven from Boulder to Salida and back. I've driven from Moffat and Crestone to Broomfield, and I can tell you it's surprising being in the vehicle yourself how far you've got to get to in order to, follow in this guy's footsteps. And so the big surprise was that Barry had jobs so far from home. Broomfield is almost 200 miles, Pueblo just under 100 miles. What does that tell you? Well, doesn't that say going to Moffat, which is less than 50 miles away, if that's what he did, wouldn't be that surprising? And so if I was law enforcement, I'd want a list of all the places Barry had previously done landscaping work, and then also a list of places that he took the family on weekends and vacations. Number 2, posturing with a question mark. To be honest, I didn't really even want to go to the Holiday Inn Express in Broomfield. The reason I did was we were picking up a vehicle at the airport, and the airport is actually very close by. Obviously, the airport also features strongly in the Watts family murders. I mean, that is where Shanann was coming from when all of this happened. It didn't seem particularly relevant at this point. After Suzanne's remains were found, there seemed to be more important places to look into, like Puma Path and Poncha Springs. But once I was there also seemed very little to investigate. Now, if we review the Holiday Inn Express narrative from the affidavit, there's also much to do about nothing. Barry arrives for work, but then he doesn't actually do any work. Barry runs around dumpsters, but why does he need to go to whatever it is, 4, 5 dumpsters after stopping at the hotel, right? And dumping some stuff at the hotel. Why not just dump everything at the hotel? And that brings us to point number 3, breakfast. Breakfast on weekends, and bear in mind Barry was there on a Sunday, starts at 7 a.m. and it ends at 10 a.m. Well, Barry arrived on Sunday at 8:14 a.m., which is plumb in the middle of breakfast at the hotel. Was that the point? I know he was seen on multiple cameras inside and outside the hotel, but did he want to be seen early on Sunday morning in Broomfield by specific people? I mean, did he know for a fact that there were cameras and that they were working? Because he couldn't have chosen a better time. When you enter the hotel, because it's open plan, it's impossible to walk from the foyer to the elevators, which then take you to your room, without being seen by the local breakfast club. Another reason to ask is whether Barry had breakfast that morning, meaning at the hotel. And if not, where did he have breakfast? 8:14 is a very unusual time to book into a hotel. I can tell you that from traveling through America for months, that even if you try and book in at 12, as I did at a hotel in California, it's like quite a big deal, quite a big rigmarole. The rooms aren't ready. So, typically check-in is 3 p.m. So arriving, 5 hours in advance of that, it's even more, 7 hours in advance of that, is perhaps going to be a problem. Barry's arrived 3 hours before most people actually check out to stay at the hotel. Also, the breakfast at Holiday Inn isn't bad. I had breakfast there, and certainly if you want to eat healthy, it makes perhaps more sense than going to McDonald's, and which is why Barry said he went there because he wanted to eat healthy and then ended up eating somewhere else. But if he wanted to eat healthy, why not just have breakfast at the hotel? They do have fruit. It would also be easy to assume if Barry was at the hotel early Sunday morning, it would be easy to kind of think, well, hadn't he spent Saturday night there? And hadn't the original plan perhaps been to spend Saturday night there? The reason I ask is because in order to be able to book in on a Sunday morning, presumably he'd already booked a room for Saturday night. It does seem like it was quite an expensive stay, especially if you're including other people there. Number 4, logging in. One of the first things I did and typically do when I'm settling into a hotel is log into the free Wi-Fi. I'd be interested to know if the hotel logs or records access show what Barry was doing and what the legal aspect is to that. If that's something that something like a warrant would be allowed to access. In any event, they may be able to look at calls, perhaps even online activity, and Barry's browser behavior while using their network, assuming that he did. And we do know that Barry was texting Suzanne just half an hour after arriving. At 8:41, Barry texted Suzanne, "I made it to Broomfield. Call me when you get a chance." 5 minutes later, at 8:46, Barry walked into the hotel carrying 2 white trash bags, a khaki backpack, a pair of boots, a dark-colored item, and a piece of clothing with blue-teal coloring. It's interesting that Barry didn't wait until 10 a.m., in other words, for breakfast to be over, when there might be fewer people about to carry things from his truck to his hotel room. It's also interesting that he arrives at the hotel, checks in, texts Suzanne, and then carries his paraphernalia to his room. Personally, I would do the opposite. I would check in, get my stuff, and once settled, make calls and perhaps do some work. Number 5, laundry. When I was in America, I stayed in 4, as far as I can remember, about 4 Holiday Inn Expresses. Not all of them had laundry in-house, but the one in Broomfield did. In fact, that laundry cubicle was right beside the elevators, almost within view of reception. Also, you could easily look in through the windows to see what someone was doing inside the room. It's interesting that the first thing Barry seems to carry into the hotel isn't work stuff. It's not paperwork, it's not shovels or tools. His first priority is carrying a pile of clothes, laundry essentially. Now, I don't know if the hotel records Barry doing any laundry. There's nothing in the discovery about that. It's also not clear whether he does laundry or some sort of cleaning up in the hotel room. It would be very strange if he does laundry in the hotel room when there is a laundry facility downstairs. The point is there are laundry facilities. They are coin operated. I do quite a bit of driving to get those coins. And so when I used the facilities, it took around 2 hours to complete a washing and drying cycle. Bear in mind, Barry arrived there just after 8. At 10:06 a.m., Barry exited his hotel room and he was carrying the charcoal long-sleeve shirt. He was carrying that and 2 white bags and a pair of boots. So he seemed to be carrying the same clothing that he'd brought with him back out the room. And that in itself is kind of bizarre. Why would you, something that you want to get rid of, why would you take it into the room if you're going to take it back out the room? And so my impression is that Barry wasn't doing laundry. Instead, he was going to throw clothes away, just as Chris Watts did with the girls' blankies at a dumpster on Black Mesa Road, which is around the corner from Saratoga Trail. And also just as Crystal Kenny did in the Kelsey Bereth case, although in her case she set fire to those bags. The bag was filled with a bloodied sweater and other items. So there we already have interesting potential intertextualities. 20 minutes after breakfast at the hotel ends at 10:20 a.m., the location of Barry's phone was near the lot of McDonald's 625 Interlochen Boulevard, Broomfield, Colorado. As per the affidavit, at 10:22 a.m., the driver door of the F-350 opened in the rear parking space of the same McDonald's lot. Barry is seen on video provided to CBI from the First National Bank, 615 Interlochen Boulevard, located adjacent to the McDonald's lot. He is carrying unknown items in his hands and placing items into two separate trash cans located on the edge of the McDonald's lot between 10:19 and 10:41 a.m. Now, what's quite interesting is how long he is there. He's there for more than 20 minutes. Also interesting is that the camera is coming from across the road, not actually from McDonald's itself. And so one does wonder, was Barry aware that he was filmed when he was there? Now, it's hard to say whether Barry is doing anything nefarious or whether anything he's putting into the trash cans might be worth anything to the investigation. Interestingly, at one point he was asked, "Did you dispose of tranquilizer darts?" Barry responded that he did. Unfortunately, the affidavit is very unclear on this point. Where did you do that, and when did you do that? He is asked about McDonald's, and I think he says, "I don't recall." Like, what were you doing there? What did you dispose of there? It does note that Barry appeared to be carrying a small item while disposing of things at McDonald's. Back to the affidavit. From the bank video, Barry exited the truck, walked to a trash can while he held an unknown smaller object in his left hand and possibly his right hand. He placed something in the can, extended his right arm downward into the can, and walked back to the open driver's door. Barry was oriented towards the inside of the driver's door and the driver's side floor for the next few frames. He walked to the same trash can, possibly with an item in his right hand, extended his right arm into the can, then placed both hands and arms into the can. Now, this placing of the hands right into the can does seem like something deliberate and someone going to quite a lot of effort. And one wonders whether he did the same in the hotel parking lot or the menswear parking lot. And so maybe Barry did want to go to a dumpster, but he also wanted to go to several other dumpsters to perhaps confuse anyone in terms of knowing which dumpster had something that was actionable, if that's the point. Now, Barry may be innocent for all we know, but if you consider the psychology, Suzanne is killed at the house, then the bicycle is staged to draw attention away from the house, then the helmet, which draws attention even further away, and so it goes on, doesn't it? Now, Barry bringing tools into the hotel in the late afternoon seems staged as well, suggesting he had been out all day and now maybe we need to go to the work site, to the wall, and see if there's anything there. All of this suggested that Barry was working with tools which he very obviously leaves at reception. Why not just leave it in his truck, especially if he's going to be in the truck himself? Or is he leaving these tools for someone else? Well, they never actually use them, and there is no documentation of the Broomfield job. All I'm trying to say is it feels like there's staging upon staging upon staging. And when you think about the dumpster activity, is it all staging? Is none of it staging? Or was this trip to the McDonald's trying to get rid of something small but real and necessary, whereas all the rest was not real or not something that really needed to be disposed of? And so, like the Murdoch case, we've got to ask the question, are we dealing with a manufactured alibi? It feels like it at times because Barry gets up so early. He goes all the way to Broomfield, ostensibly to work, but instead of working, he's visiting dumpsters all morning. That's the other thing. Didn't he go to Broomfield because he had a big job to do and, it was kind of a big job and it was urgent? And then when he gets there, what does he do? And in the conclusion of the affidavit, they note that he woke to his alarm at 4:30 a.m. that morning. That's what he said, even though no alarm was actually set on his phone. And his phone and his truck telematics were moving in the 3 o'clock in the morning hour. His phone and his truck were moving. And so what's that all about? And then he had to suddenly leave for a job in Broomfield, but he didn't even tell his co-workers that he was leaving that morning. Anyway, let's go back to that morning. At 11:23 a.m., he's back at the Holiday Inn Express. So he's left the hotel, and where he goes has actually got nothing to do with work. He wastes 90 minutes doing all sorts of things. You know, you could really dispose of all. If it is there to dispose of garbage, you could have done it all in one place. And effectively, after 90 minutes, after leaving the hotel for 90 minutes, he's done a total of 0 work. At 11:36 a.m., Barry walks back into the hotel lobby. Now he's wearing a black T-shirt, carrying under his left arm a black binder and disorganized papers. At 11:56 a.m., Barry exited his room. So 20 minutes later, now he's wearing a white shirt and carrying the binder with the papers. He walked to his truck at 11:57 a.m. Now, the question is, what's going on there? Why does he carry the papers into the hotel and then he changes his clothing and then he seems to carry the same binder with papers out? Is that to suggest he's doing work, or are those papers to do with something else? The first photo depicts Barry walking towards his room. The second is him walking away 90 minutes later wearing a different shirt. He provided varying statements to CBI and FBI about these photos. When FBI agents asked Barry why he did not park near the dumpster to throw away these items, he said he did not recall. Now, it does seem like he threw away this binder with papers. And so the question is, what was on these papers? Was it important or not? The fact that the papers appeared disorganized suggests that they weren't really important papers. And what is quite interesting is when at some point Barry was asked, did you burn folders in your fireplace at home? Instead of saying no, he said something about the fact that him and Suzanne were cleaning up the office or something like that, which seems to be an indirect way of saying, yes, we did burn official paperwork, in that fireplace. In March 2021, agents showed Barry photos of him carrying a camouflage coat, a black tree container, and a bag across the hotel lot, and asked him what items were in the bag and why he was throwing those items away. He did not provide details and could not recall the items. So one does wonder whether was a tree planted close to or over Suzanne's body? Was the camouflage coat used during the commission of the crime, or are these items totally irrelevant? Now, if you want my opinion, Barry disposed of items at the lot in Broomfield, the hotel lot, the way he did, walking from one side of the lot to the other because he wanted to attract attention, because he wanted to be seen. And it seems to me the bicycle and the helmet all over again. If we bear in mind that Barry's a hunter and that hunting is about camouflage and deception, giving one's prey a false sense of reality, well then, could that be what we're dealing with here? Back to the affidavit, from 11:57 a.m. to 12:25 p.m., Barry's phone was near the Via Vara worksite for the wall. At 12:06 p.m., Barry made an outgoing call, which obviously placed him at the worksite. But he was only at the worksite he wasn't even there for half an hour. Then from 12:28 p.m. to 12:29 p.m., the location of Barry's phone was at the Holiday Inn Express. Telematics of the F-350 also registered the driver door opening and closing in the hotel lot. So he does go to the worksite, spends less time there than throwing trash away, right? And then he is at the hotel for the rest of the time. He gets out of his truck, he carries one white trash bag, larger in size than the previous bags, in one hand. In the other, he carried a black container along with a green item, possibly a piece of clothing. At 12:38 p.m., Barry placed bags, a black container and clothing from his truck beside the curb near the hotel lobby. He then walked to the truck, appeared to pick up a small item from inside, picked up the trash bag, coat and container, and walked towards the dumpsters at the end of the lot. Now, again, all of this is the second time he's going to the Holiday Inn Express dumpsters. It seems very obvious that what he's doing. It seems to say, look what I'm doing, check these dumpsters kind of thing. So again, if I'm understanding this correctly, he does 2 trips at 2 separate times to the Holiday Inn's dumpsters. And isn't this because he's trying very hard to be recorded doing something at those dumpsters? And isn't the idea then that you perhaps wouldn't look at any other dumpsters? At 12:41, Barry walked back across the lot towards the hotel lobby with nothing in his hands. At 12:42 p.m., Barry entered his hotel room. And then nothing really happens. About 2 hours later or so, 3 hours later, at 3:30, Barry sends a single outgoing message to Suzanne, call me. Then another 2.5 hours or so go by. Almost at 6 p.m., 3 minutes to 6 p.m., the telematics of the F-350 register the GPS coordinates at the Holiday Inn parking lot. And then 6 minutes later, Barry eventually emerges from his room. So he's in his room from essentially 12:42 until 6 p.m., a full 6 hours. It's a long time to be in your hotel room when you were there to do a big job. And it also makes you wonder, could he not simply have arrived at the hotel at around about this time, 6 o'clock? When the Ridders called Barry at around 5 p.m. on Sunday to tell Barry that they couldn't find Suzanne, Barry was in his hotel room and had been there since about 12:40. And so isn't that kind of the point? At the time that Suzanne is missing, at the time that people realize that Suzanne is gone, Barry is far away. And isn't that the point? Well, I'm in a hotel in Broomfield. I don't know what's happened to Suzanne. But then the weird thing is that he's, according to his own alibi, said, no, he was actually out of town for an emergency job in Broomfield. You know, it was an emergency job. It was very important. It was high priority. But then he goes there and he's in his hotel room. And one does wonder, did he intend to be out there, like at the job site, but he just couldn't stay awake or he's very tired? I think that's important to consider. If he could have done it better, because bear in mind his alibi is that he was at this job. Well, he's almost never at the job to begin with. Just point to the front. He told the FBI, CBI, and CCSO that he was at the job site. He left his room, took tools out of his truck, and put them in the lobby to make it look like he was returning from the site. Barry made very little attempt to contact Suzanne on his way home or look around his house or the bike scene because he already knew what happened to her. That's according to the words of the affidavit. Setting the tools out that day was similar to what happened earlier that morning when Suzanne's bicycle was placed on the incline. As Deputy Brown commented, I started to question if something criminal had occurred as it looked like the bike was purposely thrown in this location. Anyway, at 6:03 p.m., Barry exited his hotel room wearing a black shirt with his khaki backpack on his back. At 6:05 p.m., Barry made an outgoing call to Martin Ritter. A minute later, Barry pulled his truck in front of the hotel and walked into the lobby before walking back out the lobby at 6:08 p.m. Now, what's quite interesting here is now he pulls his truck closer to the hotel now that he's going to be, I guess, unloading the tools. That's quite interesting. At 6:09 p.m., Barry made an outgoing call to Morgan Gentile, At 6:10 p.m., Barry entered the lobby carrying 2 shovels and placed them beside the front desk. He made subsequent trips, placing more tools in the same spot. So this seems to be a big effort to say, I'm working, I was here for work. And obviously if you weren't paying too much attention, it might look like that was going on. At 6:12 p.m., Barry left the hotel lot in his truck. Now, if you think about it, he was called at about 5 p.m. by the Ritters, and he only leaves there over an hour later. So he didn't exactly seem to be in a hurry to get back. At 6:20 p.m., Barry made an outgoing call. At 7:10 p.m., Barry received an incoming call from the Chaffee County Sheriff's Office. At 7:21 p.m., Barry made an outgoing call to Suzanne. At 7:33, CCSO dispatch called Barry and informed him in a 1 minute 32 call that Suzanne's bike was found. Barry starts crying. It's almost like he immediately knows what's happened. It's just a bike that's missing. And he said that he was heading that way and asked, did they find the phone? Now, what law enforcement query at this point is they say he didn't ask if Suzanne was found. He just wanted to know about the phone. At about 10:30 p.m., Morgan Gentile arrived at the Holiday Inn Express and checked into Barry's room. Now let's return to the Watts case. Remember I said we know Barry was listening to multiple episodes of Forensic Files. Did Barry also pay attention to the Watts case? Did you know the most searched for high-profile crime in Colorado isn't JonBenet Ramsey, it's the Watts family murders? As you know, I covered that case extensively, and that case involved a man who concealed the murders and disposal of his wife and 2 daughters, their bodies, within the fabric of simply going to work. And of course, Chris Watts was caught and charged in super quick time despite this apparently devious scheme. Now, if you think about it, the Morphew case suggests something similar. It suggests that someone hid his crime and disposed of his wife's remains within the fabric of simply going to work. It's the same thing, and you would tend to think it's the same thing if you knew the Watts case. Except Barry's simply going, the whole thing that Barry was simply going to work is a bit of a stretch to begin with when you know what day he went there. Because unlike Chris Watts, who went to work on a Monday, Chris Watts got up earlier than usual, went to work on a Monday when he wasn't really needed to be there. Barry gets up super early, goes to work on a Sunday, meets nobody, and if you look carefully, he doesn't seem to do any work. But that's not the point. If you were in Colorado and you were first confronted with the Morphew case and you knew about the suspicious trip to Broomfield, you'd be searching the work site, wouldn't you? Just like occurred in the Watts case. And you'd be searching all along the route to and from the site for Suzanne. And isn't that what law enforcement did? And you wouldn't find anything because there would be nothing there. Isn't this because where you really should be searching isn't Broomfield, isn't that whole route? It's the Morphew home and the area around the home, and then a little bit later on, Moffat. And a small, invisible, nondescript little place 40 miles in the opposite direction to Broomfield. And that brings us to this idea, if Barry often drove long distances for work, now, does that mean that if the whole thing in Broomfield had nothing to do with the disposal of a body, does that mean where Suzanne was buried had nothing to do with someone driving long distances to work or someone disposing of a body on the way to a work site? And so here's the rub, and it's merely a theory. What if Suzanne's killer often drove long distances to work? And what if he thought of disposing Suzanne's body a long way from home, bearing in mind that home is where her daughters also live? And so he can't afford to leave the body in that sort of area. And what if Suzanne's killer did dispose of Suzanne's body within the fabric of going to work, except the killer first counterfeited the going to work with a staged version of going to work? In other words, it's still hidden within the fabric of going to work, just not the one that is made so obvious and on camera again and again. And that is why I'm questioning this idea of, was there a lot of posturing going on? Okay, I'm about to conclude. Consider the following timeline. Watts family murders, August 13, 2018. Chris Watts sentencing and the release of the discovery, 19 November 2018. Murder of Kelsey Bereth, just 3 days later, Thanksgiving Day, November 22nd, 2018. Patrick Frazee convicted, a year later, November 19, 2019. Murder of Gannon Stork, January 27, 2020. The reason that's also important is it's someone is murdered, someone is taken away from their home and it isn't found for a substantial length of time. And then the murder of Suzanne Morphew essentially 3 months later, 4 months later, 4 months after the murder of Gannon Stork. When did the Morphews arrive in Colorado? If you think about this timeline that starts in August 2018, well, they arrived in June 2018. This means they were fully settled in Salida when the Chris Watts case exploded in Colorado. Incidentally, when Chris Watts recorded his relationship repair video, guess where it was from?
Chris Watts. I'm doing my communication speech for Brenda Armentrout, and welcome to Broomfield, Colorado. About 70 degrees, and it's awesome outside, so welcome.
Then, just as that case was settled, another case detonated, but this time much closer to home if you were in Maysville or Salida. Florissant is only twice the distance compared to Maysville to Moffat, and this time it's in a similarly rural setting. This second perpetrator did a lot better than the first. Patrick Frazee got away with a lot more and did a lot better in terms of his criminal psychology than Chris Watts. And then there was the murder of Gannon Stork, where Letitia cleverly hid her movements. How? By using different vehicles, several vehicles, some of them rentals, and hence her prosecution took even longer than the previous two perpetrators. Why Moffat? There may be several reasons, but what's interesting is that Barry's pal George Davis did a grid search on a 22-mile radius from Puma Path. Well, Moffat is about twice that distance, which, if you think about it, perhaps the killer said something like, well, let's get out of the minimum search area. Maybe let's make it twice as far just to be safe. And so Moffat is actually around about 46 miles from Puma Path. Now, in hindsight, the question arises, didn't the killer of Suzanne Morphew apply the lessons learned in these three nearby neighboring cases? And hasn't he done so successfully? Thank you for listening, and I'll see you guys next time.